We've turned the Sermon on the Mount into spiritual wallpaper. Beautiful, but silent. But these blessings weren't meant to soothe. They were meant to stir. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the mourners. Blessed are the peacemakers. These aren't just virtues. They're proclamations. Jesus is saying, I have wonderful news for you who are poor. I have wonderful news for you who are meek. I have wonderful news for you who are mourning. I have wonderful news for you who are merciful. The world as Jesus knew it was upside down and cracked and broken. Jesus didn't offer comfort to the comfortable. He offered confrontation to the powerful. His words weren't just ideals, they were tactics. A revolution of love, a politic of mercy. This is the way that resists. I'm John, and this is Gospel Politic, where faith meets justice and the truth refuses to stay silent. You have heard that it was said, but I say to you. Jesus here wasn't just offering wisdom. He was declaring war on the logic of empire. The Sermon on the Mount is the manifesto of a new kingdom. Not a kingdom of domination, but of disruption. Not built on violence, but on vulnerability. Not enforced by law, but embodied in love. This is the revolution of Jesus, and it begins with a way of living that exposes the false peace of empire, which the empire's big marketing campaign, I guess you could say, was Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. But that peace was held together, ironically, with terror and violence and blood and imperialism and oppression, atrocities. So let's look at kingdom versus empire. Empire says dominate, retaliate, exclude. But Jesus says serve, forgive, embrace. Empire builds walls. Jesus breaks bread. Empire demands allegiance. Jesus invites discipleship. Empire crucifies. Jesus resurrects. Miroslav Volf reminds us, and this is a theologian that's highly influential on this series, but he reminds us, he says this, the will to embrace transcends the will to exclude. The kingdom of God is not a private affair. It is a public truth. Jesus' teachings weren't public abstractions. They are public provocations. They were tactics of resistance. So we see a few of these principles for this revolution. Feeding the poor as economic disruption in a world that hoarded wealth. Jesus fed multitudes. No permits, no payment, no hierarchy. He didn't just meet needs, he disrupted systems. He revealed a kingdom where abundance is shared, not controlled. Prayer and fasting, part of the disciplines of the Jesus community, prayer and fasting. It was a spiritual defiance. See, empire thrives on spectacle and distraction. Jesus taught secrecy. Go into your room, close the door, pray in secret. Fasting wasn't withdrawal, it was resistance. Prayer wasn't an escape, it was empowerment. You see, according to the way of Jesus, prayer is where revolution begins. And let's look at one of the hardest actions that the follower of Jesus needs to understand, and that is forgiveness, especially loving your enemy. But these things, forgiveness and loving your enemy, is a political subversion. See, empire demands vengeance. Jesus commands love. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, he says. This isn't weakness. It's refusal. Refusal to be shaped by the violence of empire. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's unhooking from retaliation. It's a political act of kingdom allegiance. Let's look at turning the other cheek. Turning the other cheek isn't being a doormat. I've heard that all my life. Being a doormat, just letting a bully do whatever they want. Actually, it's the opposite. It is a tactical resistance to the bully or to the empire. We're going to take a look at next. This is a 3-part series, by the way. So next we have a lot with this gentleman, this theologian named Walter Wink. And Walter Wink has quite a few works in his career that are very useful. This one I really recommend because it's a small, I call these daggers, this little small dagger. It's called Jesus and Nonviolence, the Third Way. And in the Third Way, Walter Wink discusses the brilliance of Jesus's ethic here. To turn the other cheek was to expose injustice. To go the extra mile was to reveal exploitation. To give your cloak also was a shame to the system. I mean, think about it. You're being overtaxed. You're taken to court. They, as a symbol, even take your outer cloak. Like, look, you owe us all this. Give us your clothes. You strip off your undergarments too and walk out of court naked. That's going to cause a scene. And that was to show the exploitation, the injustice of the Pax Romana. Anyway, that's just one example. Do not resist an evildoer. When we say this, when we are told this, it doesn't mean surrender. It means don't resist them on their terms. So we see Miroslav Volf, who is a theologian who's very influential in this section here with Kingdom versus Empire. Marvelous mind with a lot of works for you to check out. For example, check this out. But Volf helps us see what Jesus was doing. Jesus was forming a community that refused to mirror empire, a community of embrace over exclusion, a politic of mercy over domination, a public faith that confronts injustice with love. Jesus didn't just teach a better way. He himself embodied a better way. Jesus didn't build an empire. He dismantled one, meal by meal, prayer by prayer. This is the way that resists, not with swords, but with solidarity, not with domination, but with dignity. Jesus was not naive. He was strategic. He gave us a way to live that exposes the life of empire and reveals the truth of the kingdom. Jesus didn't just resist empire, he redefined power. He didn't gather armies, he gathered outcasts. He didn't enforce purity, he crossed boundaries. And Volf helps us see what that means, not just ethically, but politically. So let's look at exclusion and embrace, the kingdom's posture. See, empire excludes to maintain control. It draws lines. It builds walls. It defines worth by dominance. But Jesus embraced the excluded. He touched the unclean. He ate with sinners. He welcomed the enemies. And Volf writes this: the will to embrace transcends the will to exclude. Forgiveness flounders when I exclude the enemy from the community of humans and myself from the community of sinners. Jesus didn't just teach reconciliation, he practiced it. And that practice was revolutionary because in empire, reconciliation is weakness. In the kingdom, it's power. So the cross here, in this context of embrace, the cross is not just a symbol of suffering, it's a symbol of embrace. Jesus stretched out his arms, not to strike, but to welcome. He absorbed violence without replicating it. He exposed injustice without becoming unjust himself. Volf calls this the drama of embrace. Opening the arms, waiting, drawing the other in, not losing oneself in the process. This is the kingdom's posture, not passive, not permissive, but radically open and radically discerning. So in A Public Faith, another work by Volf, he warns against two temptations: privatizing faith, which is retreating from public life, or imperializing faith, using religion to dominate. And Jesus avoided, and I would say condemned, both of these. He didn't hide his teachings. He didn't force them on others. He lived them publicly, vulnerably, disruptively. The kingdom is not a private affair. It is a public truth. It shows up in how we eat, how we forgive, how we organize, how we resist. Jesus didn't offer a better kingdom. He offered a different politic, built on mercy, not might, formed by embrace, not exclusion, sustained by love, not fear. This is what Volf calls soft difference, a way of being that is distinct but not domineering. And I think we can see some things relevant to our own society today. We live in a society where parties communicate through fear. There's constant need to fact check. And even we're living in a time where even fact checking doesn't really do anything. Like you can prove that this leader said a lie and nobody cares. And out of fear, we blame the brown or the immigrant or the stranger for problems that they couldn't possibly have caused in the first place. And this is how empires have ruled throughout the entire history of the world. We're not special, but we are an empire. And that's what brings me to this. Church, how are we to live and exist in empire? We are to live in the revolution of Jesus. We are not to live in fear, but love. We are not to exclude, we are to embrace. We are not to hate, but to love. And we are not to lie, but to speak truth, especially truth to power, even when it means it will cost us dearly. The church is called to embody this soft difference, to be a community that resists empire by living the kingdom. In a world ruled by exclusion, Jesus built a revolution of embrace. So the question is not, what do we believe? The question is, how do we live? Do we exclude like empire, or do we embrace like Jesus? Because the way of Jesus is not just a theology, it's a politic, it's a revolution, and it begins with how we treat the ones empire forgets. The revolution didn't end at the cross. It began there. Jesus gave us a way. Volf helps us with that framework. But now we have to ask, what does it mean to live this revolution today? Well, I believe that Jesus offers us examples of practices that subvert empire. The Sermon on the Mount isn't obsolete. It's not irrelevant. As I've heard so many politicians say, it's insurgent. Feeding the hungry today confronts economic injustice. It says people matter more than profit. Forgiving enemies today breaks cycles of violence. It says we will not be shaped by hate. Fasting today resists consumerism and cultivates clarity. It says we are not what we consume. These aren't just spiritual disciplines. They're revolutionary habits. They form us into people who can resist empire without becoming it. Faith must be public. Not imperial, not privatized, but embodied. Volf says a vision of flourishing life must be lived publicly to be transformative. So we ask, how does my prayer shape my politics? How does my forgiveness shape my relationships? How does my table challenge the systems that divide? Because the way of Jesus is not a retreat from the world. It's a reimagining of it. So here's the invitation. Here's the call to action. Practice a discipline this week. Feed someone. Forgive someone. Fast with intention. Join or support a movement that embodies gospel justice with mutual aid, prison abolition, housing equity, refugee solidarity, especially right now. Ask yourselves, what tables can I turn? What neighbors can I embrace? What powers need unmasking? This isn't about perfection, trust me. If you knew me, you'd know there's no way that I think it's about perfection. But it is about participation. It's about choosing the kingdom of God again and again and a world that keeps offering and forcing upon us the empire. The way of Jesus is not a retreat from the world. It's a reimagining of it. And if part 1 today was about the teachings of Jesus, part 2 will be about the trouble those teachings caused. Next time on Gospel Politic, we move from words to action. We'll explore how Jesus practiced revolution, turning tables over, healing on the Sabbath, crossing purity lines, and confronting the powers face to face. Because the way wasn't just preached, it was lived, and it got him killed. I mean, we talked about this last episode with Romans 13. He was executed by the state, not for being a nice guy and preaching a Platonic view of heaven and earth, so far removed from who Jesus actually was and what he actually did and taught. So join me for part 2. Jesus and his practice of revolution, where every healing was a protest, every meal was a movement. Now, I want to ask you this too. If what you are seeing and hearing from us here at Gospel Politic is helpful or challenging, that's amazing to me. We would love if you followed us, liked us, subscribed to the channel, spread the word, and let people know that we're here. Stay with us. Come with us as we continue to explore Jesus and how he guides us as we resist empire and disrupt injustice for our neighbors. We'll do that together. Challenge, educate, speak out. Your voice matters. I'm John, and this is Gospel Politic, where faith meets justice and the truth refuses to stay silent.